Lorwyn, Chapter 4. The son of Kinsbaile sat comfortably in a tastefully appointed office, entertaining a visitor who filled most of the remaining space in the room. Gaddock Teeg was lean for a Kifkin and tall. It was often said outside his earshot that he must have had a little elf blood in the family tree. Sen Teeg always wore a simple tunic and trousers, confident the large silver flower he wore was enough to tell anyone who didn't already know he was the most important Kifkin in town. The son of Kinsbaile was seated, but he tilted his head up, peering over the edges of his spectacles at the red treefolk sage, who lowered his head.
Sage Colfenor, I must beg your pardon and ask, is that wise? Surely you should contact your protege and spare us the risk of sending this other way so soon after we've found her.
The treefolk sage answered with a customary deliberation, his deep voice booming.
Did you just ask me whether my plan is wise?
Colfenor, the red hue's sobriquet, was easy to explain. He had a venomous temper, as quick as any yew poison, coupled with a remarkably sharp tongue for a creature of his age. Though he was certainly an ancient, revered sage and keeper of mystical lore, Colfenor was just as certainly something of a grump. Well, yes, Gaddock Teeg replied. He had been Sen long enough to know that one could maneuver around a direct question when it was pointless to evade one.
Is it? I think it is, Colfenor rumbled. My apprentice has not been as available as I require. He needs the most urgent summons I can send, a tangible, visceral message that he cannot ignore or put off. I want the Flamekin to find him and bring him here. Why are you changing your mind now, Teeg?
I am not. I was just asking as to... Gaddock Teeg sighed, and he tried another tactic.
As you say, Sage Colfenor,
he said, dropping into a more formal tone and nodding his head in an unconscious bow before the sentient tree. A drop of sweat ran down Teeg's forehead and hung off the end of his round nose. That nose twitched. The Kifkin was clearly nervous. One of his staff rescued Teeg by knocking gently and entering with his head bowed. Teeg straightened and summoned the young man to him with a crooked finger. The youth stood on tiptoe to whisper in Teeg's ears. The Sen nodded.
Thank you.
He dismissed the lad with a toss of his head and then turned to Colfenor.
They're here, right outside Columnia. It would appear our Flamekin friend is quite punctual, reliable. I never doubted it, the red youth rumbled with a nod. Reliability is most important to me.
He pointed a long finger at Teeg.
You will escort me to meet her. Now, please.
The great treefolk was crouched low in order to confer with Teeg. His long legs folded in a manner no Kifkin or elf could ever emulate. With a series of creaks and pops, he straightened to his full 20-foot height beneath the vaulted ceiling of the Sen's meeting chamber. The branches and foliage that covered his head, shoulders, and arms added another 10 feet to that when he was in the open. They pressed against the skylights. He towered over the Kifkin Sen, his upper boughs scratching Teeg's beloved ceiling frescoes without a thought, and the Sen could see the conversation was over. He filed away a mental reminder to have the frescoes restored as soon as possible. As it was, he led the giant treefolk outside to the columniers.
Ashling, isn't it?
Sen Teeg extended his hand. The Flamekin took it in hers. The Kifkin, to his credit, never flinched, even as the cool flames licked his wrist, and shook her hand. At your service, the Flamekin replied. Sen...
Gaddock Teeg, the Sen said. I believe you have met my predecessor, Smitsmot, more than a decade ago.
It has been a while since I've seen Kinsbaile, Your Honour, Ashling said graciously. Sen Smitsmot left the town in good hands, I can see, and it would appear, from the outside at least, that you haven't changed much about the Sen's mansion.
No, indeed. Sen Smitsmot made me promise not to. Swore if I ever tidied the place up too much, he'd stage a coup, Teeg said. And I hope you're right about my good hands. Though I do appreciate the compliment. Welcome back to Kinsbaile, Pilgrim.
Thank you. I am not often sent for, and not often found when I am. I was surprised you were able to get word directly to me. How did you know I would be on that crag at that particular time?
I did not, Teeg admitted. I received help in finding you from another.
Teeg's face lit up as he caught sight of the grim-faced Kifkin approaching with a bow strapped across her back.
Bridget Backley, meet Ashling the Pilgrim, the Sen said.
Teeg gracefully stepped aside to allow the hero of Kinsbaile to bow deeply to the Flamekin. Ashling returned the gesture in kind. Please, just call me Ashling, the Flamekin said, bowing her head to the Kifkin archer. I doubt anyone will forget what I am. Not in these parts.
Bridget is my good right hand around town, the Sen said, and she's the best ranger and tracker we have. No one knows the field like Bridget. That'll be a great help to you in delivering the message.
I do not usually require a guide. Ashling spoke politely but firmly. The path will lead me wherever this message needs to be delivered. The Sen's eyes twinkled.
Ah, but will it lead you there in time? This missive has to find the recipient as quickly as possible. Who better to aid you than the hero of...
Trust me, Bridget Backley said. Her eyes were as stern and inquisitive as the Sen's were open and bovine. Clearly this woman had not bought into the legend that had grown up around her. She was a tough-looking Kifkin, hard and flinty, and her arms were thick and ropey from years of mastering the bow slung across her shoulder. The paths around Kinsbaile are different from what they used to be. How so? Ashling asked. Boggarts, for one, the archer said. She bit thoughtfully on a piece of long, mildly narcotic arrow grass. The same stuff the elves used to make the shafts for their projectiles. And the elves aren't much better. If they find you someplace they think you shouldn't be, you get along well enough with elves, do you? Well enough, Ashling said. Backley's seriousness may be normal for a Kifkin archer, or it might be more of the same superstitious prejudice exhibited by the matron. But Ashling's instincts told her it was neither. That Backley had simply seen so much of life, hero or no, that she rarely joked about anything. Ashling decided to let the archer's question lie for a minute and turned to Teeg. Begging your pardon, Tare, but what exactly is this message that needs to be delivered?
If you and Archer Barclay, the Sen said, would be so kind as to accompany Sage Colfenor and me back to the office, all will be made clear.
Ashling nodded, and followed Gaddock Teeg as he turned on one heel and set off across the square and around to the back of the Sen's mansion, to where Colfenor stood, majestic and aloof at his full height.
Sage Colfenor the Red Hue, may I introduce Ashling, a Flamekin pilgrim who has agreed to help us ensure your message reaches its intended recipient.
Wait, his message? Ashling asked. You were the one who summoned me, Sen.
You do not wish to carry a message for me? The Hue rumbled.
It's not that, the Flamekin objected. I just like to know who I'm working for. The Sen led me to believe...
Teeg did as I asked, Colfenor said. I am sorry for this mild deception, but it was necessary.
It is no problem, Ashling said. So, who is the recipient? The fairies listened to every conversation they could. They were especially interested in what went on between the sage, the pilgrim, and the proud politician. Between the three of them, the clique could cover all of Kinsbaile without even straining, and there wasn't a single story they missed. Not a tale, argument, insult, or sweet declaration of love that escaped their notice. From the window of Colomina's to Teeg's inner sanctum, to Angus Gabble's general store, the Kifkin's foot weft bound the inhabitants of Kinsbaile together and made the joyous job of collecting dream stuff a breeze. Ashling made arrangements with the Sen, the Sage and the Archer. Endry, Visa, and Ileona converged outside the Sen's mansion to make sure Ashling didn't get out of their sight, and they followed along behind when Teeg and the famous archer, Brigid Backley, escorted the Flamekin and the treefolk back to town square. The clique listened intently to Colfenor's words and the Flamekin's response. They took careful note of everything that was said, and remained unnoticed even by the towering treefolk. It wasn't difficult for them to draw on the Kifkin Fortweft, and it was an excellent source of information and control, two of the Vendilion clique's favourite things. At last, the trio's eavesdropping produced something truly interesting. The target of the treefolk's missive, what Colfenor wanted, was simple. There was an elf, the treefolk's student or apprentice or some such thing. The Yew wanted to see this elf, this Rhys, but the elf had been hunting for some time and wasn't responding to Colfenor's summons. The Flamekin was going to find the elf and bring him back here to meet with the sage, and the sour-faced archer was to accompany her. The treefolk was very clear about the urgency of the summons, but the Flamekin never asked the obvious question. Why? Why didn't the treefolk simply find the elf himself? She was a good messenger, obviously experienced enough to know when not to be curious. Or maybe she just needed the thread, and didn't want to risk losing the job for prying like a Kifkin gossip monger. Visa nearly took it upon herself to ask Colfenor, but fortunately Ileona stopped her impetuous sister in time. When the Sen and Ashling started discussing payment, the fairies drifted back away from the town square. They had gathered enough information to make sharing it worthwhile, especially the part about Colfenor and the elf. All they needed to do was to find a place to pass it along to she who demanded the information. Once they were outside the village, the trio broke into a shimmering storm of giggles and titters as they raced to their destination. Moments later, all three were gathering over a small ring of speckled white mushrooms growing along the western fringe of the village. They hovered, reverently closing their eyes as the happy trilling song died away. The Kifkin called them fairy rings, and believed fairies created the fungal circles when no one was looking. The Vendilion clique, and indeed all other cliques, also called them fairy rings, but not for the same reason as the Kifkin. The fairies called such growths by that name because the fairies used them to travel to and from the glen that hid the being that was to them God, Master, Queen and Mother, all in the same package. Una! They each thought silently, the name of their queen echoing in each of their heads. Mother of us all, Queen of the Fae! It took Una no time at all to notice them, and the trio leaned close together, touching their foreheads at the centre of the fairy ring. Their wings buzzed excitedly, and scintillating powder swirled around them. Within moments, they were gone.